Welcome to Jaguar Bootcamp, Timing Your First Race. Part 1, Preparing for That Big Day. The information in this presentation is the property of Innovative Timing Systems, LLC. All of this information is confidential and may not be disclosed to anyone outside of Innovative Timing Systems or your own company without written authorization from the President of Innovative Timing Systems. This presentation is only provided to customers who are under a current support agreement that has not expired. When you begin to prepare for that race, you're going to want to make sure there are a number of things that you get accomplished, and it all begins with communication. One of the mistakes that timers often make is they don't spend enough time talking to the race director or race organizer and asking those critical questions that are needed to make sure you fully understand what it is they want you to do. So let's talk about some of the things that you're going to want to do. First of all, you need to communicate often with the RD. It all begins when you first talk to them. And again, this is the very first time perhaps they've called you or you've called them. And you want to start asking questions that are open-ended. Things like, tell me about your previous year's experience and what you liked and didn't like about maybe the timer. Or perhaps they've never timed the event before, and so you're going to ask them questions about how they've done their race in the past. And essentially what you're trying to do is develop a history. You want to understand their mindset and what they're hoping to get out of the timing experience that you're going to provide. So previous year's experience is very important, and you want to make sure to ask those leading questions that'll teach you more about that. Now, one way you can be prepared for that call is you could simply go to their website. Almost all races have a website, and you can go and you can take a look at the photographs. Nothing impresses a race director more than when you've looked at the photos, you've read the results, and there's a little trick you can use that'll help you win that race. A lot of times, if it was previously timed, in other words, in past years, they hired a timer and they had problems, you'll actually see that in the data. You might see missing start times or missing splits or finish times, or in some cases, we've even seen on websites where the race director apologized for such poor results for a particular year. So investigating their website is crucial, and you should absolutely do that. Now, when you're communicating with a race director, one of the things you want to make sure to do is not only talk to them often, but put a lot of things in email form. One of the things that can happen at the end of the race is the race director may say, well, I had no idea you were going to do this. And that can cause problems. So one of the things that's very important is to document everything. We suggest you use email, and one of the tricks that works really well on an email is to always put at the end of that, let me know if you have any questions, concerns, or if I've not communicated this information clearly to you. It's a great thing to do at the end of an email, because then if they come back later and say, wow, I don't think we ever talked about this, you can say, well, yeah, we did, and in fact, I asked you if you had any questions. So an email is really crucial, and we prefer that we almost always communicate via email. Now, keep in mind, you do want to have a few calls because you're trying to develop a relationship. You're really selling yourself and your services, and that warm approach on a phone call can sometimes make the difference. Now, one of the most important things you might want to consider putting together, and you could do this on your race site just like we've done, is you can create a survey form. When somebody contacts ITS and they're interested in hiring us to come out and time a very large event, we're going to ask some basic questions that are really crucial in order to make sure we can put together the proper proposal and also price it correctly. One of the things you don't want to have is scope creep, and it can in fact happen. You can get hired to do a race. The race director shows up on race morning and says, where's my kiosks or where's my television displays? You want to be able to say, you know, we asked you to fill out the questionnaire. This is exactly what you wanted. You might have that equipment with you, but you're certainly not going to want to give it away. And so you're going to want to be able to say, we've communicated this in writing and you filled out the questionnaire. Let's take a look at some typical questions that we have on our questionnaire, and maybe this will help you if you were designing your own. You'll notice, obviously, company name and contact name, their position in the role. Very important to ask. You may not realize it, but a lot of races will have a race president. They'll have somebody who's responsible for the organization, and that's rarely the person that actually has to do the real work on race morning. Their job is typically more of, firing the starting gun, talking to the press. The person that's really going to be talking to you on race day is going to be the head of the race operations. They may call it that. It may be the race director. It could be the race organizer. They may even have somebody whose role it is to interface with the timing personnel. So it's really important you understand what their position and their role is so that you find out if you're talking to the right person, especially on race morning. Contact email, contact phone number, the URL for the event. You probably will already know that because you've done your research, but if not, this is their opportunity to tell you where their information is located. You'll notice that on some races, year after year, the URL, in fact, may change. And the reason for that is they've sold the race. So you can go look for a race. It may have been renamed, and so asking them is always a great idea. Now, the detailed description of the event, very crucial that they fill that out completely. If they don't, you should absolutely send them an email and say, we just don't have enough information. You want them to describe their event. It's a legally important thing, but more importantly, you may figure out that they have kind of a perspective that you hadn't thought about. You're saying, well, it's a 5 and 10K, it's not difficult. Turns out the description is far from simple, and maybe it's a 2-loop 10K, for example, where they're going to run right back through the starting line before they finish. So these are the kinds of things you want to understand. You'll see here, how many participants do you expect at the event? And a fabulous question, what are you basing your expected participation on? We've had events where the person said, well, I'm just basing on the fact that we're going to advertise and therefore we'll have 10,000 people. And so it's really important to understand how did they come to the sort of conclusions that they did in terms of how many people will be there. Of course, you have to ask what type of event it is. If it's a running event, cycling, if it's a triathlon, one of the things you want to be asking are how many split points? Because a lot of triathlons may say, you know, we're going to have something coming out of the water. The transitioner will have 3 gates. And we'd like to have a couple of split points out on the course. So you definitely want to ask that because you're going to charge more and it's going to be a lot more work. If you think about the amount of staff that's needed for a triathlon, even if it's a small, let's say it's a sprint or Olympic distance triathlon, and the race organizer says we're only going to have 150, 200 people, doesn't sound very hard. And in fact, you might think, well, you know, that's not much harder than a 5K, and that's not the case. When you have a triathlon and they start to add split points, it becomes very complex, and your staff size will go up exponentially. It can be very large in terms of the number of people needed. You'll also want to take a look at things like what's the cutoff time, as you see here on the form, and some other questions basically that give you more and more information about how the event is going to be structured. Okay, now you've got your survey form filled out. Hopefully they've sent that back to you. And you're going to use that to begin to configure the Jaguar software. Keep in mind, Jaguar is very powerful. There's a lot of things it can do, but you really have to make sure you understand the race inside out so that you can set it up properly. We're not quite done yet understanding the race. First of all, expectations. We want to make darn sure we have documented clearly the expectations of everybody involved in the race. And here's a great tip for you. If you have a committee that's operating the race, do not assume that the person responsible for hiring the timer is the guy that has the expectations and has it all understood. That's not the case. And in fact, what you want to do is you want to talk to the race committee. You want to make sure to get in front of them, or at least have several of them communicate their expectations. What do I mean by expectations? Things like how often do they want to have data handed to them on results? You know, every 5 minutes, maybe every 15 minutes. When do they want to have their award ceremony? All these sort of things are expectations, and you just need to fully understand that. Another example would be if somebody says to you, we have to have a perfect race. It has to be 100% perfect. Well, that's going to be a problem. You're going to want to reset their expectation and help them understand that timing is not a perfect business. It's, you know, we don't always get 100%. In fact, it's not normally the case that we have a perfect race. That happens, but those are exceptions. So you want to make sure to set the expectations for them, and that's your side of the equation. They're going to tell you what they want. You're going to tell them what's possible and what you can do to deliver that. And so it goes both ways, basically, and you're documenting that. Another thing you want to do is really take a hard look at the location. Location can have a huge impact on races. One of the big mistakes that sometimes timers will make is they'll sign a contract to go do a race, and the race organizer will say, oh yeah, it's a real simple course, no big deal, you don't have to worry about it. If that race is within, say, an hour or two of your home and you can drive there, you should. The only exception to that might be if it's a 5K, you know it's being held in a park, it's on the bike path, and there's only going to be 100 people. You're not making a lot of money. You might not drive there, but I can tell you for most races, you're going to want to do a site survey. What you also want to ask is, what time is the course going to be closed to traffic? So if you're setting up on a street, you've got to know, based on the permit, when they're going to close a road. The race director for most events has to get a permit. They'll go to the county or a city for that, and that permit almost always has the hours of operation for their event. So they may say the road's closed at 6 a.m. Now, does that mean the road's closed at 6 a.m.? No, it doesn't. In fact, very often what happens is the race director gets the permit. The police don't want to come out and actually move the barricades and close the road. They're expecting the race director to do that, and so it doesn't happen. So one of the things you can do is show up a little early, and if the barriers are sitting there, just put them in the road. Or in our case, we take our own cones. We'll actually close the road. If we know that the permit is 6 a.m., we'll close the road, and we'll put up our own cones so that we can stay on track. Don't stand around and expect somebody to show up and do it. You take charge if you have to. The other thing we want to take a look at is we want to take a look at power. We want to know, how are we going to power up our equipment? Now, in our case, we carry our own generators. We never take a chance by expecting them to provide power. One common mistake is a race director will say, oh, we're bringing in a generator. We have our own generators. Never trust their generator. Always bring your own power. We're going to look at parking. How easy is it going to be to get our truck or trailers in and out of that area, and where are we going to stage all of our equipment? So the location, the site survey, very important. Essentially what you're doing is making sure that when you show up on race morning, you have no surprises. Now, what do you do if the site survey can't be done? So let's say the race is 500 miles away. It's going to pay well, but not well enough that you want to get on a plane and fly there. Well, ask the race director to go out and take pictures of the start and the finish. They can send you a PDF or JPEG or some sort of a file. Even better if they can take a video camera and maybe just shoot a movie for 1 minute of the start area and pan around 360, even better. The point is, you want to get photos. Go to Google Earth. It's a great trick. Most races are held in metro areas. Now, Google Earth won't drive one of their vans through a state park, for example, into the grass, but pretty good chance that if it's a big race, it's going to be on a road that's covered by Google Earth. So it's a great tool for you to do the survey. No matter what you do in terms of the tool, the most important lesson here is to make sure you have photographs of that starting or finish line or split point, and you have a really good understanding of what's going on in that area. Great examples, look up. People oftentimes don't do that. Are there power lines that are going to be close to your finish structure? These are the things you have to know. In a site survey, whether that's done in person or you have the race director do it, you're using Google Earth, maybe you've gone to their website, you're looking at photos from last year's event, it's really important that you have that sort of documentation and you've studied it. So these are ways that you can essentially communicate with the race director. You can set the expectations. You can understand their expectations. You're going to communicate with them via email. You're going to make sure you've done a thorough site survey. If you do all of these things, then you're really going to begin to be ready to start setting up Jaguar to deal with that particular event. Okay, let's talk about what we've covered in this first module, or part one. We've really focused on communication with the race director. How does that begin? Well, it might be that very first phone call that you have with that person to talk to them about their event. What are you going to do? First of all, be an active listener. You want to listen carefully to what that individual is saying. Don't overtalk them. Don't tell them all the wonderful things you can do. Make it obvious that you're interested in them and you want to learn more about their event. Ask them about previous years and how the events have gone. Get them excited about the growth of their race and tell them you want to be a part of that equation. They like to hear that. Great timers don't just show up in time. They are a part of the entire race experience, and that's what you're doing. If you have the chance before the phone call, so if you're going to make the call and you know that, go to the website first. Review everything. Study the past results. Be prepared to throw out maybe a comment about a photo you saw. Nothing impresses a race director more than them saying, wow, this guy really knows our event. He really cares about it. Again, you want to use a lot of emails to document what's going back and forth between the parties. You're going to send out a survey form that you can create in something as simple as Microsoft Word, or like we've done, you could build it right into your website, have them fill it out, and then click on something like a submit button. It's all about setting expectations, and to do that well, you better understand the location. You've got to know when the roads are going to be closed. How are you going to get there? Where are you going to park? How are you going to deal with power issues? And that site survey, again, can be you going out to the site or having them send you pictures. These are steps that we take every time we go out to provide our services. And if you do the same thing, you're more likely to have a fabulous race experience and really impress that race director and win their business year over year. Thanks for attending this module, and we'll see you in the next one.